what does it mean for big companies to innovate like a startup? Love this question, and it's kind of something that we're constantly grappling with. Is a core part of our mission is helping large companies innovate like startups. What that really means to me and to us is creating room for experimentation. So having the ability for your employees to fail fast, build things, try new things without it really damaging or having that like significant implications of failure. And one thing that we really talk about a lot is this concept of open innovation, where traditionally companies may have innovated in more, especially large companies, in a more closed fashion, where you have a CIO or a CEO or some senior executive come up with your strategy or innovation strategy, and then that typically would get pushed down to employees to then go ahead and work on and build products pertaining to that strategy. Whereas open innovation is this idea of innovation can come from anywhere, employees, customers, partners, and building that room to really capture ideas and concepts and foster that sort of collaboration. So that's what it really means to us is making space for that environment of open innovation while creating kind of like that safe environment to fail and experiment at speed, streamline decision making, etc.
Victor, you said something really interesting there that like innovation can come from anywhere. How do you help maybe executives or people in like decision making capacities like take that leap to investing in giving a broad base of people the time and space to go do that? Because I feel like there's a bit of a leap of faith that probably happens there.
Absolutely. And actually that's probably the part that's less hard to convince, where I think a lot of leaders will recognize this already. That, so a lot of these employees are the closest to their customers, and they've got thousands and thousands of employees to really tap into. But what they're used to is they've got their sort of cohort or maybe immediate reports, and they're used to kind of like chatting in multiple hour long conversations and figure these things out. And so what's really kind of missing is maybe the vehicle and the process and the platform to actually do these things. So that's kind of the part where the problem is not necessarily like, okay, can innovation come from my employees? I think typically that will be somewhat obvious to them, but it's more so what is the best method of actually tapping into this? And there's usually many things that they've tried in the past, like just general like ideation competitions, obviously hackathons like we've run. Maybe they've set up like incubators, but many of those maybe not have generated the ROI that they've seen, depending on how things have been set up and what they've prioritized and who they've gotten involved, and also funding structure, where the resources are coming from. There's many sort of like different parameters to this. So a lot of our work with each company is actually pretty highly customized, because the infrastructure, the organization, reporting structures, et cetera, can look pretty different across these companies. So trying to find that right model and pulling in the right people takes a bit of work and effort.
Got it. You mentioned, people might have tried these things before, but the ROI wasn't quite there. Like how should a large organization think about return on this kind of investment? I think like even just the model for it is probably challenging in the first place, and then like maybe even acting out on the model for like what your expected return should be might also be like, yeah, how do you help people figure that out?
Yeah. A big piece is that especially like senior executives will be kind of very focused on quarter over quarter sort of like growth metrics, and are looking potentially more short term, whereas as kind of we know, innovation truly is a long-term game. So while there is certainly innovation ROI and how do we achieve that, it needs to be seen on kind of like a larger time horizon than maybe a lot of executives are used to. So not within the next year, not even necessarily within the next 3 years. It might take 5 to 10 years. And this is where you start to draw parallels from like the VC industry, where they're making investments and they're looking at payback periods, or potentially realizing some of the ROI within like 10 plus years. But a lot of these executives may not necessarily be in those positions for that long. So naturally, the incentives are not always aligned. But when it comes down to like, what are those three sort of like main value propositions and areas of drawing ROI? Innovation is certainly one of them. So that's the first, and just rethinking what that time horizon is. Two is employee training and upskilling. So even if you don't achieve those innovation objectives within that first year, something that you absolutely achieve when you run programs like hackathons at scale is you get to train up thousands and thousands of employees, and that will yield a lot of natural benefit over time, where your employees are able to move faster in their own roles, come up with new ideas, and then also educate and sort of like disseminate all of that knowledge as well down to other parts of the organization. And then lastly is sort of employee engagement and retention. Is that these events just tend to be a lot of fun. And when we did this with McDonald's, actually for the first when we started, it started as being really an employee engagement exercise. Is like, hey, we just need a way to bring our organization together, have fun, and help retain our employees, but just bring and kind of like ensure that people are communicating to each other. So those last two you really do get no matter what. And then if you're doing things right and you continue to invest in this type of work, the innovation does materialize as well.
I think one thing we're seeing in, the surveys that we do, the research that we do, but also in the industry reports, is that actually some access, some introduction, some training, some upskilling in the realm of AI, generative AI, is for employees a bit of a must-have for engagement and fulfillment at this point. I think, this new world is here. This technology kind of took the world by storm, and employees, especially in enterprise, are encountering it as either as something I've not yet had exposure or proper training to, or as, after that hump, wow, something that actually truly could change the way I work and maybe the way I think. So I love that. I love how closely all those things tie together, the innovation ROI, the employee training, but also the employee engagement, and generative AI brings all three of those really closely together. I wonder if you could talk at all about on the employee side, the mindset shift when you go into one of these innovation programs or a hackathon or something like that, like just getting comfortable starting to interact with AI and understanding what that's actually supposed to mean, sort of beyond the buzz of the many promises we hear every day.
Yeah, great question. I would say it's first I'll talk about the mindset shift without the realm of AI, and then kind of like how AI really boosts a lot of these things. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the concept of sort of like deep work and like just being able to kind of like get into that zone. And it's hard to come by these days when we're constantly bombarded by emails, meetings, and especially when you work like as employees at large companies, there will tend to be a lot of meetings. And the beauty of something like a hackathon is really carving out some blank space to step away from your day job and actually just focus on whether it's like you've been meaning to kind of like learn a new tool or just try to experiment with something. It creates a lot of that space, and that's where a lot of magic happens when you have that, especially when you do that at scale for thousands of employees. Because most of the year you just don't get that, and it's hard to find also that discipline sometimes to create that for yourself. So it's a huge mindset shift, in terms of the kind of like coming into it, just like a bit of like a fresh start. And AI especially is as you mentioned is a huge part of actually employee engagement right now, because people are seeing it everywhere. You're seeing companies, I mean, well, even for us in our own hiring, we look a lot at AI fluency. And I think a lot more companies are transitioning this way, where every single employee they hire is going to need to have a certain level of AI fluency. So it's not just about engagement and getting to play around with these tools. It's actually future proofing your own career and ensuring that you will still be competitive in the job market. So seeing this investment from your own organization to boost these aspects of yourself is really valuable. But just honestly, the pace at which things are moving, there's so many exciting things to play with. I mean, there's always been a lot of cool new tools and technology coming out with every major sort of technology shift, but with AI, it just seems to be on another level. Like every day, every week, things are coming out, and for anyone who's like kind of like naturally curious, you're kind of thinking, okay, can I save a few hours of my work if I just like spent, 30 minutes or 1 hour or a day trying to build this thing and experimenting with this new tool? There's just so many possibilities. So it just kind of really accelerates that path, and it's an exciting time.
I have to just
You said
interject.
so.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I just have to interject with a story because I was just getting to talk to one of our customers, and there's a kind of business analyst, data analyst turned AI enablement specialist operating in their org. And she's using HumanFirst to do this incredible, AI work that really is working with large volumes of data, asking, direct questions through kind of custom analytics and getting these answers for departments that weren't previously possible. And she said something to me on a call the other day, which was like, I love that when you talk about AI literacy and career development, it's also this fresh start that we're all encountering at the same time. So she came to me and said, I love that I can't really ask people questions about this. I have to kind of figure it out on my own because I can't go to my higher ups who've been here for years and, have this deep expertise in technology. This is new. And I'm hands on keys figuring it out live time. I'm learning things that I can bring to them, prompting best practices, how to work with data, how to get these analytics. And now I can run them in a day. So I just think the hands-on key experience of AI experimentation, like you're talking about, is partly so rewarding and partly lends to these styles of, training and certification and hackathons and live use case ideation because the feedback loop is so quick. You get to see immediately, like, does the prompt work? Can I actually get this to work? And maybe, yeah, you have to spend an hour on the prompt or on the use case, but very quickly you see how it actually would impact your day to day. And that kind of light bulb moment for people earlier in their careers who are saying, I'm not stepping into some legacy field with, you know, generational knowledge I have to come up on. I get to be a part of this learning journey. I get to kind of lead the charge to learn how to work with this technology and what it might mean for our organization. It's such a rich moment to invite employees across all departments into that.
It is. I love that story. And it really plays into as well, like a big focus for us is kind of teaching employees this founder mindset. And as you just described, it's like you're operating in a lot of ambiguity. A lot of things that people are doing now is like for the first time ever within their companies, but also within their industry. The ability to operate through that ambiguity, find the problems that are worth solving, and the resourcefulness to kind of like dig at it long enough and just have this constantly like testing and experimentation mentality is also so core to hackathons. Beyond like the tangible tools and like training, there's also that kind of like more soft skills around navigating ambiguity in the founder mindset.
Victor, earlier on, you had said something that was that kind of stuck with me. You just have a lot of fun. Could you maybe without giving too much away, can you give us a taste? Like, how do you make some of this stuff fun?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, John, as you know, we're both ultimate frisbee players, probably naturally competitive. And these hackathons are like they're competitions at the end of the day. There's prizes to be won, usually tens of thousands of dollars worth of prizes. And that
Wow.
really drives somebody like me, and perhaps like you, but also not everyone is necessarily competitive at the same time. So apart from prizes and the competition of the thing, there is something special about the camaraderie of doing hard things with a group of people and a cohort of people. You don't necessarily see people sleep a lot during these hackathons. When you got a 24, 36-hour hackathon, they may not sleep a lot. They may not shower too much, but there's something very bonding. It becomes kind of like a core memory when there's like a sense of like mutual, I don't want to say like suffering because I don't want to paint this picture that these are like you're going through a lot of pain. But these do tend to be high stress and like high pressure moments, right? You're have to build something tangible within a short period of time and then pitch it to some of the most senior executives in your company.
Mm.
And which is, like a pressure cooker for just like innovation to happen. Along the way, we've kind of like our facilitators and our program managers will also run a bunch of different activities, whether you've got things like yoga, like you've got stretching, you've got different like mini games, like spike ball, and sports. We've brought out frisbees at time as well and played like can jam, which I think that's what it's called, can jam, where it's like you're trying to throw it into like kind of like a little slot if anybody's familiar, and collect points. So we do a lot of kind of like fun little competitions to ensure people have a break because you need a break during this time as well. And that's kind of like during the hackathon. But then even leading up to the hackathon, we do a lot of activities that are interactive, especially kind of like design thinking-esque, really inspired to kind of get people thinking and interact with their team, generating ideas, figure out problems to solve. So those are just a couple ways that we kind of make it fun for folks. But very, very consistently after our events, people come back to say, and they've, if they've never had this kind of like experience or like this much fun while participating in kind of like a work event. And even more so, actually, we've had a lot of people come back. We're putting out a blog article soon of like how it's actually transformed their careers because they got to work on something that they don't typically work on, that maybe got recognized by a leader. They completely switched roles and now they're doing something that's much, much more fulfilling to them as well. And that's something that really excites me. I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but like
No.
a lot of entrepreneurship was about bringing that freedom and being able to kind of like work on things that ultimately fulfill myself and that I feel extremely passionate about. And just because you work within a large organization doesn't mean you can't find that, which is so much of like what entrepreneurship is about. And having and hearing these stories of having people kind of like carve that out for themselves and find their own journey is incredibly inspiring, incredibly meaningful for the work that we do.
That's so cool. I love that story about this person who found a new gig within their gig. You mentioned entrepreneurship. Can you like speak to that a little bit more? Like maybe tell from your own personal journey in that realm and like, what it means. Well, maybe for the audience, like what does that actually mean, entrepreneurship? And like, yeah, speak to some of your own experience as an entrepreneur, an entrepreneur, and what are the similarities or maybe differences?
Absolutely. So quick kind of like background on my own career journey was I started as sort of a failed entrepreneur, graduated university, tried to build a tech startup. We were banging our heads against the wall for about a year before we eventually kind of like shut things down and won't get into the details of that, but eventually decided to do a 180 and then join the corporate consulting world. From within there, I was in Toronto and I kind of knew very early on that maybe the corporate life was not the right fit for me. But I had kind of navigated in a way where I was trying to make my way to San Francisco, get a visa, and eventually started running hackathons on the side for fun with a coworker of mine. And it picked up steam and traction with clients. And the next thing we knew, they were asking, "Hey, could you run this actually just for us?" That's where kind of like the spark hit of, hey, could we turn this into, can we create a business model around this? Can we create a business case and actually turn this into our full-time jobs? Because we were extremely passionate and excited about running hackathons. So it kind of comes back to finding that like area of fulfillment for ourselves and carving that out. And much like entrepreneurs will go raise funding from venture capital, from VC funds, we were trying to raise funding from internal leaders. It was a bit more complex in the sense of we had to really nail down and figure out which department or which leader would want to invest in this. And initially we thought it was the most natural fit for the innovation org. But after kind of like months and months of like going around making pitches, we actually ended up being funded by the learning department. And they saw hackathons as kind of this huge like upskilling benefit for both internal employees, but also clients. So anyways, all of that came about. We got the funding. It turned into our full-time jobs. I didn't end up moving to San Francisco. And we built this. Now we were running our own thing within this company. And so coming back to your question of kind of what does it mean to be an entrepreneur within a company, I think it's a lot about just kind of like carving out your own path. It's bringing that same founder mindset, which is why we really kind of like champion this, which is you don't necessarily need to be a founder or an entrepreneur to have that founder mindset, that ability to kind of like challenge the status quo, carve your own path, navigate through ambiguity, because this process didn't exist. We were within a 400,000 person company. We were, if not, probably one of the first, if not the first, to kind of like carve out this weird position for ourselves to the point where we didn't even report to anyone. And that creates its own sort of like challenges. But we didn't report to anyone anymore at that point. We kind of like built up this service. And then 6 years ago is when we actually spun it out as our own company, which is what Onova is today. But anyways, that's the quick background on my journey from entrepreneur to entrepreneur and what entrepreneurship kind of means to me.
That's amazing. And the word failed entrepreneur is certainly no failure because it often kicks off stories like that. And what I love about that example, I think companies and people right now expect generative AI to be primarily a value creating technology, right? We're in a world, maybe I can, write my emails faster, or I can do a little more research or some of those things. But the end goal we're all pointing to, and the reason there's budget and the reason there's excitement is we understand this could create pockets of value across the org in ways very much like you did, in ways that the people closest to the company are able to innovate and see that something's missing, or deliver more value to the customer, or hear the customer more closely, or speed up their work in that, so that they're able to take on more in a day to day. And you talked about some funding coming from the learning team within your org. I'm curious kind of how you see, I mean, I know it was, so Canada just passed this big AI bill earlier this year, and a big part of the spend was dedicated to what they're calling upskilling and education. So it's clear that there's budget. It's clear that some of that budget needs to be allotted to learning and upskilling. How do you maybe see companies that you work with make that case and find those resources for the learning and the upskilling part of the technology adoption process?
Yeah, absolutely. And this tends to be kind of like one of the most important things that we're seeing with our clients right now when it comes to even doing a hackathon to begin with is kind of like upskilling and training first. Really, the case is just future proofing themselves as a business. They recognize that, this is this brand new vast landscape, and it's, the next big thing may not come from just kind of like one person, and you can't just have your CIO kind of like trying to take in all this information, because it's so vast. There's so many new tools coming out. There's so many different ways of working. So it's almost necessary to have, and this has always been the case with training in general, but especially now, extremely necessary to have your employees educated and trained up on these different tools. So I think it's about maintaining competitive advantage and future proofing their own business. And that ultimately back leads to that innovation ROI, which translates to ideally revenue back for the business.
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know, but we can't stand still. That definitely is a feeling we've felt too across teams that we work with. That's awesome. Maybe a question came in through the Q&A box, and we could kick that off and keep going or take more from the audience. But this one here says, I guess for Victor and John, executives often say that governance is something that's important to them to figure out before democratizing AI to the whole enterprise. So what's your advice on basis leaders need to cover with regard to governance?
Do you want to go first, John? You got.
Sure, I'm happy to. I think the first thing is you need to consider a lot of the standard things that you'd go through when evaluating any software product around security and governance, right? Like, who has access to data? What is the form of data that you're going to be working with in these projects? Are there the right access controls around it? Have you boxed it up in the right way with the right securities and policies and procedures? So I think this is all pretty standard practice that just about every security team will have in place. And maybe AI feels scary because it's like a little bit new, and are we going to be training the model or not, or what's going to happen with our data? It's the same as any other software product. So go through your standard process, and you'll probably arrive at the other side in the right place that fits with your own organization's policies and procedures. So that would be my first recommendation. And frankly, it's not any more work than any other software tool that you might bring into your org. The other thing is chances are your organization's probably already has a handful of AI models in production or in deployment already, and they've probably already gone through this work for you. So, I mean, those are my first two thoughts. But yeah, Victor, love your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just data privacy, cybersecurity is kind of a must. So thinking through all your typical checklists, but as you said, it's not necessarily any different from kind of any other technology. I think what I'd say here as well is just also really kind of carving out that space for to really kind of experiment. So while governance is incredibly important, what we've seen with some of our clients is actually to really innovate at speed and with something moving this fast, because you can figure out kind of like what that governance structure looks like, and then a new tool gets released or some new kind of like regulation or something's happening, and then all that goes out the door. So how do you kind of like stay nimble? And we see that especially in the financial services industry and big banks, which are highly regulated, is actually carving out separate entities for innovation so that aren't necessarily governed by some of the same regulations. And that's we've seen as kind of like a practice, especially on the innovation side and the venture side within some of these big companies. So finding that space or that team that can do that while at the same time having all the governance conversations. So once things start to pick up traction, it's not just like, oh shit, okay, we've built this really cool tool now, but we have no understanding of how this actually integrates with our overall system and how this should sit. So I think both of those are kind of really go well hand in hand.
That's a really good shout out about the like separate org. It's really interesting, and like, yeah, I think that's certainly would free people up to be able to operate without like concern that they're going to be having a negative impact to things that are already in production, right? Like if you're even from an organizational structure point of view, like in a separated entity, that's a really good suggestion.
That's great.
Cool. Sorry, go ahead, Victor. You were going to say something?
No, it was just I'll pass back to you guys.
Sure. Okay. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the, like, maybe share one or two stories of some of the outputs or things that people have come up with as a result of some of these hackathons that you've put together.
Yeah. So I most of them I can't share, but there is
Fair.
one that kind of went more public, and I'll kind of describe what is the like post hackathon even journey, because this tends to be a common pitfall of just companies that run hackathons in general. Is they expect this big innovation ROI, and then 99% or up to 100% of the ideas just kind of are hackathon ideas, and then they just go sit on the shelf. And how do you really kind of like champion to actually turn these into real products at the end of the day? Because that's kind of an ultimate goal, especially when we're talking about innovation. So that process that we typically run is in a couple stages. But first is, how do you like prioritize and refine the ideas post hackathon? Great, you've got hundreds of ideas. How are you evaluating these like venture capitalists would? Like, who's the founding team, or do we need staff a team? How big is the opportunity? Do we as a company necessarily have a competitive advantage to actually execute on this? And then categorizing kind of like all these ideas into across like effort and impact, and kind of on the separate scales, you'll have maybe quick wins that are something that we can go like do tomorrow versus like moonshot type ideas, where it might be kind of like investment over many years. And then comes into the structure of setting up, in some cases we'll call it like an incubator of sorts, or many people refer to different kind of programs, or just be kind of like a team. But what does that structure look like to actually take those ideas from hackathon prototype built over 24 hours to production feature or product? And that typically will require recruiting subject matter experts, like a public incubator like Y Combinator or 500 Startups, et cetera, might have, who are all your folks from data privacy, cybersecurity, legal, finance, et cetera, to ensure that things are being built and can properly be integrated to the system, while also having your technology experts, your business and design experts. Where's the funding coming from? Who are the program managers? And typically what we do is we'll kind of like facilitate and structure the program in a way that kind of like factors in for all these stakeholders. And the outcomes of this is usually three paths, which is one, by the end of something like an incubator type program, which could be like a 12-week program of taking a hackathon idea to like something more production ready, is maybe we just find out that like this idea, we've experimented, we've tested it, we don't have maybe enough consumer demand or user demand, so we kill the idea. Two is, okay, this is great. We've got a lot of legs. Let's just now integrate this into an existing team's roadmap. And then that can kind of like easily be handed off. Or three, we kind of like now stand up a separate pod slash team, kind of not too dissimilar from how my co-founder and I kind of were our own independent entity to now really kind of like carve out our space to build this up. And I'll share the one example that I will share is actually from our work with McDonald's, where we ran a hackathon for them we ran their global annual hackathon for over 5 years. And one idea that from a couple years ago, we ran the hackathon in October, and this product went live, or this feature went live in the global McDonald's app across hundreds of restaurants, probably 3 to 4 months after the hackathon.
Wow.
So you talk about kind of like speed, especially at a behemoth of a company called like McDonald's. But it was specifically the text on arrival feature within the app. Especially this was kind of like key, like core in the pandemic, when you can kind of like order through the mobile app, get your text and notifications, pick up your order, etc. So there was kind of like a team that picked it up post hackathon, went through this phase of like iteration, ensuring that they go through all the checks, of course, to eventually launch it. But yeah, there's an article out there on the internet, but that was one of the success stories. But I wish I could share more, but a lot of them tend to be kind of uh, we're not supposed to share.
Yeah, of course. But that's a really great story. I appreciate you sharing what you could, and that like really valuable insights on like how you turn the idea from a hackathon into something that's actually tangible and operational in the business. Well, I think we got another question from the audience. So, have you noticed any signs of AI fatigue or overwhelm among employees engage people in the long-term value of AI if they are seeing some fatigue?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So, from employees, like surprisingly, I mean, it's been, a couple of years really since, of course, the initial like advent of ChatGPT and all this buzz and excitement. But now that we're seeing kind of like really more tangible use cases coming out, I think for like, past the initial wave, there's some signs of fatigue, but we're still seeing a lot of engagement and excitement from employees. And I'll give one example from one of our clients, Capgemini, where we've run, in the past few months alone, 3 Gen AI hackathons. And that's a lot of hackathons in a short span of time. But we're consistently getting, 2,000, 3,000 people show up to these. And a lot of them are the same employees that are just kind of like serial hackathon attendees, but they love it. They love building on top of like from one tool to the next. First, they're building on Gemini, then they're building on like Azure's AI like sandbox, and then it's Amazon. So they want to experiment and they want to kind of like play around with all the tools. It's exciting time. And now it's migrating past like your typical like it's not just like chatbots that you can build anymore either. It's not just like internal, like kind of like chatbots or kind of like, or like content automation, which are kind of maybe some of those more like low hanging fruit, but now really being able to impact like supply chain decisions and like demand forecasting. And like, I think the possibilities are kind of endless with kind of like each of these people's individual roles, but also what they're necessarily seeing for their respective clients. So honestly, not as much fatigue as maybe some would expect, or even after these couple of years, I think the excitement is certainly building from what we're seeing.
I'll add,
Very
we've
cool.
had the really kind of special experience of training a couple of companies and teams and cohorts all in the room together, as you were saying, and that's a very like kinetic experience, more so than delivering anything virtually. And you were mentioning some of the incredible, like very high level use cases or solutions or apps or in industry, initiatives that come out of some hackathons. But I've also seen some more maybe like smaller, but also fundamental light bulbs that go off when you teach somebody with AI that when you get rid of kind of the blank page syndrome, when you teach them how to just start interacting with an AI model to get closer to where they're going and then turn that into a prompt that can run. When you show somebody for the first time that you can do these things at scale. So it's not just one-off tasks here and there, but like look how you can really prompt in parallel and perform a transformation at an incredible scale. And when you get to do that with people across teams, right? And there's a like I'm not John and I perhaps are not the demographic of your average hackathon, right? Like, but we are like so bought in when we do this as a team, or we get cohorts together with the companies we work with, people across all departments, all varying levels of technical expertise, and there is kind of an in for everyone, right? I can do much more in an AI hackathon now than I would ever be able to contribute in a previous life with the coders and things like that. Awesome. We're almost at time, but I see one more question. Maybe I'll lob that to either of you, and then we'll wrap up and tell people where to find you. But so this is a question about AI use cases you recommend tackling first. That might be like low risk but high reward for employee adoption in a training setting.
I'll share one, and then I'm sure you guys have a ton. But I think, low risk is really anything internal facing, and we're seeing a lot of hesitancy from obviously, like especially clients within highly regulated areas of exposing customer data before they kind of fully comes back to kind of all the data privacy and cybersecurity aspects of everything. But when it comes to kind of like internally is kind of like democratizing information and the access and the speed at which you can access that information. So taking kind of like massive knowledge bases and turning these into something easily accessible through. And it kind of comes back to those, like when I talk about the low hanging fruit of like just creating like kind of a knowledge based chatbot or generating emails and content, I would say those are low risk and pretty easy to grasp. And there's probably a few other kind of like internal workflows depending on which area people are functioning within that they could tackle there as well. But we'll pass to John, as I'm sure you guys are seeing a ton as well, especially built on HumanFirst.
Yeah, I think I think there's maybe two categories that I like to think about it. One is like company use cases that are maybe applicable or valuable to like the broader organization or a larger group of people, or like individual use cases. And so sometimes it's easier to think about like what's a use case I can just do for myself as like a nice easy entry point. And so there's like simple things like summarizing calls and capturing your notes or turning notes into a more presentable PowerPoint or a report or something like this, and saving those kind of prompts that you might then use repeatably yourself. Those are really simple, kind of nice entry points into gaining the skills around how to work with a large language model or generative AI. And then when we think about maybe more company-wide type of applications, think a really powerful use case, something you mentioned, Victor, is like internal versus external. Internal, certainly far lower risk. But really, there's a huge amount of power you can unlock and knowledge you can unlock when you can take a large data set or the information that might be in your knowledge base and you can start analyzing it. So you have a lot of customers there. The starting point is like, let's look at all of the calls that client-facing teams have and let's analyze it for employee performance or customer feedback or customer journey mapping. And there's a whole bunch of use cases that you can start unlocking when you can take natural language text and you have large volumes of it and process it as quickly as you might just one phone call or one data point versus a million. So these are some of the kind of different examples that we've seen with our customer base.
Right on time. You guys are pros. Victor, where can people sort of find you to continue the conversation or learn more about Onova?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, just Victor Lee. There's probably millions of Victor Lees out there. So if you look up Victor Lee Onova, you'll probably have a good shot at finding me. Email victor at onova.io. And whether it's kind of like jumping on, I'm happy to jump on kind of like quick strategy call, even just giving feedback. Is something that we offer for many people who kind of come through is like, hey, like this is kind of what we're trying to tackle with. That's something that we do quite often. But then also we have our newsletter, which is on our website, onova.io, in case people want to check that out, subscribe, and then hear some of our insights and client case studies as well that we share quite often.
Beautiful. And John, if you could share.
Yeah, again, find me on LinkedIn or reach us on our website. We're also going to be hosting some in-person and virtual sessions to do some workshops in the coming future. So stay tuned for some of those, but certainly happy to connect with anyone and share some examples of some of our customers and insights from what we've learned out in the field. So yeah, looking forward to it. And thank you, Victor, for the time.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate you having me.
This was a blast. Cheers, guys. Thanks for coming,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
See ya.